everybody. It's time for the final episode of my course, How Writers Become Authors, a step-by-step guide to crafting your novel. Today we're talking about how to properly pace your novel so that readers aren't rushed or bored. Pacing is the rhythm and flow of your novel. It's how fast or how slow the story is moving. But we usually look at pacing in multiple contexts. For example, some novels are labeled as fast-paced overall, whereas other novels are labeled as slow-paced. This is determined by the types of scenes and writing style that dominate the story. Any novel in one of the adventure subgenres will likely be labeled as fast-paced. For example, sci-fi adventure or action adventure, because these stories usually feature fight scenes, chase scenes, and other scenes that require speed. Genres like contemporary romance, literary fiction, or cozy fantasy will typically be slower paced. This is because these stories usually focus on character development, which typically requires time. But before we determine if our book is fast-paced or slower-paced overall, we first have to plan and write the scenes that are going to make up the story overall. Even if your book is primarily fast-paced, not every scene should be fast. That would be an exhausting read. It would feel like a workout just to get through the book. And even slower-paced books have some fast scenes. For example, scenes where the characters are arguing or the tension is high. That's because if the book was slow the entire way through, it would be boring to read. It would feel like a slog to get through. So here are my tips for properly pacing your novel based on the type of experience you're promising to your readers. Not all books should be paced the same because not all stories are the same. These tips are available for you to manipulate so you can find the perfect pacing for you. First off, vary the pace and emotion. This is especially easy to do in the planning phase, so if you have an outline of some kind, now's the time to whip it out. As we already covered, you don't want too many fast scenes in a row, and you don't want too many slow scenes in a row. You want to mix it up. If you're not sure what type of pace a particular scene should have, view it through the eyes of your main character. How do you think that moment would feel if you were experiencing it? A good rule of thumb is that anything action-packed, like a fight scene or a battle, should be faster paced, and you don't want to have too many of them in a row. Now, when we're looking at moments that should be slow, we're not talking about boring instances. Remember, we're trying to eliminate boredom, not cause it. Think about the scenes that your characters might want to savor, like happiness or love, and consider moments that might feel like they're stretching on forever, like embarrassment or torture. These scenes will likely have a slower pace, and again, you don't want to put too many in a row. Another way to seemingly manipulate the pace of your novel is to vary the emotion, and I like to call this the roller coaster method. Whatever emotion your chapter begins with, end it with an opposing emotion. If the chapter opens with an emotional high, end it with an emotional low, and vice versa. For example, if the chapter opens with a blood-pumping, riveting fight scene, end it with them reaching safety and feeling relieved. This helps with pacing in two ways. One, opposing emotion tends to have different pacing, so you'll start alternating between slow and fast scenes almost automatically. And two, switching up the emotional tone of your novel will automatically keep the readers on edge, which in turn will keep them reading. Since their emotions are constantly changing, they'll never get bored. This will lead to a faster reading experience, even if we're dealing with a slower paced novel. Second point, sentence structure matters. This point is simple. Your sentence structure will communicate whether a scene is fast or slow. Short sentences create a faster pace, and longer sentences create a slower pace. Now, you don't only want to use short sentences in a fast scene because that would read as robotic and choppy, and you don't only want to use long sentences in a slow scene because that would get really hard to read. You should always have a variety of sentence lengths in every scene, but the faster scenes should have more shorter sentences, and the slower scenes should have more longer sentences. And be cognizant of specific moments when you want things to be occurring at lightning speed or other moments where you want things to be moving at a glacial pace, because in those moments, sentence structure is going to communicate that for you. And our last point, understand when the details matter. This is another simple one. The more details you provide, the slower the scenes will be. Does that mean fast scenes should have zero detail? Of course not. Stories are told through descriptions and sensations. Say you're writing a character's first date with their lifelong crush. This would be a slow scene because the character is going to want to savor every detail. The softness of her palm as they hold hands, the way her hair smells, her melodic laugh. Now say you're writing, you guessed it, a fight scene. You want to use important details like powerful verbs to really sell the action. But if you describe every single maneuver, every article of clothing, every drop of sweat, it's going to feel as though the fight is occurring in slow motion or like they're fighting through molasses. It's also important to consider the rule show, don't tell. We all know showing is usually better than telling when it comes to writing fiction, but telling absolutely has its place. The number one place when telling comes into play is transitions. A transition is when you're moving from one scene to the next. It's usually the least interesting part of a book, and thus you want to get through it fast. This is when you don't need a ton of detail, which means you can tell rather than show. For example, say you're transitioning the scene from day to night. You could simply tell the readers, "Night fell." There you go, a 2-word transition. The last thing you want to consider when it comes to detail is how engaging the content is. That should be a given, right? But I encourage you to make engagement a priority, not how long the scene would actually last in real life. Say your character is taking a test at school. Normally, they'd have an hour to take the test, but tests are boring and stressful. Don't make the scene take an hour to read. Focus instead on what matters most, like maybe the fact that the character didn't study for the test and they think they failed. The next scene may be a big but brief argument between the main character and their best friend, and this scene is super important to the plot. Maybe this scene ends up being longer than the test scene, even though the fight lasted 5 minutes and the test lasted an hour. This is fine. It's okay if the argument is a longer scene than the test, because the argument is important to the plot. It's also engaging, and thus it requires much more detail. Put your detail where it matters, where it's going to create immersion. If you add too much detail to a scene that isn't engaging, it's going to slow the pace to a standstill and make it a boring read. So that's all I got for you today. Thank you so much for taking my course. I hope you had a blast and learned a ton. If you'd like to learn more about writing or publishing, check out the other videos on my channel. And if you need any extra help with pacing, I have a worksheet in the description below. The first 3 books in the Saviors series, The Savior's Champion, The Savior's Sister, and The Savior's Army, are all available for purchase right now. They are also available in Kindle Unlimited. I have them linked below. You can also check out my writing craft books, How to Write Romantasy and Shut Up and Write the Book. They are available at all major retailers, and they are also listed below. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel. I post new videos on Wednesdays, and I host live streams on Mondays. I'm also available on Twitch, so check me out there. And if you want to be alerted as soon as I upload, ring that bell. Bye!
Hey there, this is Lisa Corton-Leone, narrator for Shut Up and Write the Book by Jenna Moreci. Be sure to subscribe to Jenna's channel and ring the bell. That way you're alerted as soon as she posts a new video. Trust me, you don't want to miss this stuff.